I'd rather crunch into a peppercorn than like a piece of ginger.
Wow.
TBH.
Hi, my name is Rachel, and welcome back to the Sago Show, a series where we dig deeper into the history behind some of our favorite Filipino dishes and sweets. It's been some time, and this season we're going to move a bit further up in time and focus mainly on the 20th century, so a time period of American colonization of the Philippines for half a century, and the aftermath of that. If you've watched up until now, you know that we take no bite for granted because whether we're aware of it or not, we live the effects of hundreds of years of colonization and imperialism to this day in the food that we eat. So let's take it away with the first dish of the season, Kaldereta, which is a rich tomato-based stew. I'm using beef today, but traditionally this is done with goat meat. These are the ingredients we're going to be using today. We've got some vegetables, tomato sauce, American cheese, and canned liver. Let's get started with 2 pounds of beef chuck, or whatever stew meat you want to use. We're going to cover this with water, then add a teaspoon of whole peppercorns, 2 bay leaves, and 1 tablespoon of salt, and cook this for 45 minutes. We can tell that caldereta is a Spanish-influenced dish because of the ingredients and preparation. We talked about last season how tomatoes are not a native ingredient to the Philippines, but it shows up in a lot of dishes like menudo, afritada, because the Spanish brought it in the 1500s. But I've told you already that this season we're going to be talking about the 20th century and American imperialism in the Philippines. Before I get to why American imperialism affects this dish, the beef broth is done, and we can set aside both the beef and the stock because we're going to be using both. Next, let's get out the stew pot and add olive oil over medium-low heat. Add 1 whole head of minced garlic, and we're going to slowly saute it until it's just crispy on the edges and also sticky. That's why we want the heat to actually be pretty low here. The ingredients I'm actually most interested in talking about today are the canned and processed elements. In addition to the canned tomato paste, there's the processed American cheese and the canned liver. I have trouble naming very many other recipes from Southeast Asia or Asia in general that use these ingredients. And so it got me thinking, when did we start seeing these meat and dairy products show up in Filipino cuisine? But now that our garlic is ready, and we can tell because the pieces are starting to stick together, we can add 1 large onion that's been cut into half-inch pieces and saute this for about a minute. Then we're going to add 4.5 ounces of tomato paste. Let's add the beef and saute for 3 to 4 minutes. And then add about 2 tablespoons of patis or fish sauce. And so in the time period where the Philippines is an American colony, there are a lot of canned foods being sent to American troops and settlers. For many settlers, this was a preference because they were afraid of local food being unhygienic and unsanitary. Edith Moses, who is the wife of an American settler in the Philippines, wrote in her memoir about what they would do in fear of getting diseases. She writes, "We hosed off the China boys and Filipinos with disinfectants. Of course, we eat only tinned vegetables and well-done meats." And there's so much there that I want to say, but first I'm going to add enough of the beef stock to cover the beef by a 1/4 inch. Then we'll start phasing in the vegetables in order of how long they need to cook. Let's start by adding in the 1 medium potato that I've cut into 1-inch pieces because this will take the longest time to cook. And we're going to let this boil for about 5 to 6 minutes. Because American settlers had these canned foods, they also became highly coveted by Filipinos because canned foods were something that was only enjoyed by the elite class. And with that, canned food began to permeate Filipino cuisine. And the US also had a new market to import canned meats and dairy. And now that it's been about 5 minutes, we're ready to add the carrots and continue cooking this for about 15 minutes. And by the way, the Philippines is one of the largest markets for US exports in Asia, with processed food exports alone being a $1 billion market for the United States. That's what I think about as I find Filipino recipe after recipe that uses canned products. At this point, our potatoes should be almost ready, so let's add 1 chopped red bell pepper and 1 cup of frozen peas, and chorizo cut up into cubes. Cook this for about 10 minutes, and then add the amount of olives to your liking. I'm adding a handful. Next, I've created a slurry with the canned liver spread and about a 1/4 cup of the beef broth that I'm adding to the stew now. This is going to give the stew a very rich flavor. Also contributing to the decadent flavor of the caldereta is 3 singles of American cheese, which I've cut into small pieces. We'll want to give this a good stir and continue to heat until the cheese and the liver are well combined and the stew starts to boil. Once it starts to boil, you can either stop right here or you can continue to heat it if you need to thicken the stew. We're serving this over rice, and this meal always makes me so happy. It's one of my mom's and my lolo's specialties and one of my all-time favorites. It's really good to be back with you. And if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, please go ahead and do that and click on the bell to set your notifications so that you can stay plugged in for the next episode next week on the Sago Show. My name is Rachel. Salamat.